Aries and Scorpio are two signs that are in conjunct in astrology, meaning they're 150 degrees away from each other. And I find that with signs that are in conjunct, there always is a strong attraction between them. The thing about the in conjunct relationship is that there's kind of a movement away from each other. These signs are very different, almost so different that they're opposite, but they're not different like an opposite sign would be, because Aries and Libra, it's on the same axis, right? And so there's actually a lot of similarities between two opposites. In some ways they can mirror each other. You know, they are two sides of the same coin. But two in conjunct signs are literally two different coins. The other thing that's interesting about Scorpio and Aries is that while Aries is ruled by Mars, Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. Traditionally, Scorpio was co-ruled by Mars. Now, I think that Pluto is really the proper ruler for Scorpio, but its connection to Mars does speak to the warrior mentality of both of these signs. Putting aside the formalities, what is the nitty-gritty of this kind of relationship? Well, these two signs have an unparalleled amount of passion, and they express it in different ways. Aries is more spontaneous action. It's almost a childlike type of energy. It's playful. It is direct. It is immediate. When an Aries person feels something, they express it immediately. They don't think about it. They're not stewing on it. And for that reason, they can be incredibly fun and playful, and they love games and competition and all these things. And Scorpio is also incredibly intense, but in a different way, in a slow moving way. A Scorpio, if something is bothering them, they say, oh, you know, I'm fine, or we'll talk about it later. Meanwhile, there's like a rising tide of emotions just buried deep within themselves. And they hold on to emotions and they don't express them spontaneously. And sometimes that leads them to hold grudges if they're not outletting it or expressing it. The TLDR though is that there's just so much raw emotional power in both of these signs, and so much of that can be applied not just in relationships but toward life generally. And each of these signs sense that quality in each other, and it makes for usually what is a pretty strong immediate attraction. It's like real recognizes real. Both of these signs are badasses in a lot of ways. The real, where the rubber meets the road with compatibility for these two is there enough in place with these individuals or within other things in their chart which will allow them to sustain that fiery, steamy connection beyond just the honeymoon phase, beyond the puppy love, lusty kind of phase. Because a typical relationship arc with these two will be, oh wow, we're extremely into each other, very hot and heavy. They usually will meet and kind of start feeling those very fast. Like the attraction happens immediately, and once it starts, the people want to spend time together. It's very exciting. It's very just, both of the signs feel it, right? Like Mars is just so stimulated and excited, and they see this mysterious, deep person that's strong and has this aura about them. And Scorpio sees this person that maybe has a strength that can kind of match their own, but they appreciate that this is a person that has spontaneity that can help Scorpio sometimes lighten up and just kind of do things and not, be so much of a wet blanket sometimes. And I love Scorpio, but we all know there's a wet blanket potential when we just get a little bit too bogged down, right? The challenge is that once both of the signs really get to know each other really well and get to know the other person's weaknesses and their flaws, it's very easy for that connection to get extinguished almost just as fast as it started, or faster, which sucks. That sucks. Like, this is usually the couple that can't keep their hands off of each other, and then there comes a point when there's a lot of frustration that builds up, and then suddenly, like, they can't stand each other They're sitting on opposite sides of the couch. The intimacy is totally gone. And obviously that's no fun. What it really comes down to is how these two people will engage in conflict, right? Because all couples, all relationships, there has to be conflict. That's natural, it's normal, it's healthy, but it's about having conflict in a productive way. And even if not productive, in a self-aware way, so that each person is aware and responsible for how they fight, so to speak, and they're each aware of their limitations. And there has to be a way for problems to get solved, because typically during a fight between a Scorpio and Aries is that Scorpio person, there's something usually that Aries did that bothers them, or there's something that they're trying to communicate, and it's not just like one thing. When there's a thing for Scorpio, it's not just like, oh, it's this, and they explain it in one sentence. That's rare, right? It's more like they kind of have to like wind up, and it's almost like they're doing stand-up. They gotta like warm up the crowd a little bit, set the emotional stage before they really get into what the problem is, the punchline, because if you don't like set the stage, it won't make sense, right? So it goes. There's two things that make that challenging, right? Is Aries sometimes not always have the patience for that. Like they just want it to get spit out. And so if they're very emotionally activated, sometimes they can be insensitive, right? Or if there is resentment that's been built up, there's more of a tendency to be impatient. And those things for Scorpio, when Scorpio is going through like a scorpionic, like really emotional moment, are so like triggering. Secondly, like Aries sometimes has a really hard time of just like acknowledging what someone else is feeling without feeling like they are admitting that they're wrong, or they did something wrong, or that they have to accept some kind of criticism. And sometimes Scorpio is sort of criticizing Aries, and Aries might have a hard time owning it, but sometimes Scorpio really just wants Aries to be able to step into Scorpio's mind, their point of view, just for a second, just to validate and understand. Like Scorpio wants to be understood. And sometimes, again, either Aries can't do that, or is unwilling to do that, or because these signs are in conjunct, there's never going to be this perfectly satisfying resolution every time, or there's never going to be this like perfect middle ground that both signs can access, right? Because they're in conjunct, they're always sort of moving away from each other. It requires one person kind of being the bigger person, or not being the bigger person, but both partners need to take turns stepping across the line and sort of seeing it, right? Like Scorpio, you have to see where Aries is coming from, and Aries has to see where Scorpio is coming from. And you have to kind of take turns doing it, because it's not like people are always going to be perfect at the same time and it's this perfect thing, right? It's sometimes Aries is going to realize it, sometimes Scorpio is. Sometimes one sign has to kind of do it just for the sake of love, and just kind of like, okay, agree to disagree, without actually saying that. Scorpio doesn't want to hear that, Aries doesn't want to hear that. But that's kind of the mentality, right? Otherwise, what happens is that there's no satisfaction, there's no real resolution or release of the emotions that get built up during these conflicts. And what happens is just resentment gets built up. And anytime resentment starts getting built up in a relationship, it is going in a bad direction and fast. And that's especially true with these signs, because they're such warriors at heart. If there's unresolved anger or frustration, it can't last long. But if two people really learn to love the differences and the flaws of their partner, and love them in spite of it, and are also willing to be self-aware and work on themselves and be accountable for themselves, this partnership can be incredible. Like really freaking incredible. Of course, whether these signs are able to do that, it depends on the maturity level of the individuals. Also depends on the rest of the chart, right? So that's Aries and Scorpio.